Okay. Everyone ready? Okay. We're going to start on Samech Zayin Amud Beis. We're going to pick up the Gemara has gone into a segue from the Mishnah on Samech Vav regarding dowries and supporting children and daughters and chasans. Gemara has a side topic where it starts talking about some of the laws of Tzedakah. So the Gemara is on Samech Zayin 67b, 8 lines from the top. Tana Rabbanan, Dei Machsaro. The pasuk in Re'eh says the word Dei Machsaro. We're going to first read the Gemara, then we'll look at it inside the pasuk. Pasuk says that you have to help out your ani. Okay, you have to help out the one who needs help by giving him according to what he needs. Dei machsaro, asher yachsarlo. That's what the pasuk says. Dei machsaro, asher yachsarlo, what he is lacking. Dei machsaro zehabayit. Actually, I'm sorry, the next one. The Tanu Rabbanan is 8 lines from the top. Tanu Rabbanan, Dei machsaro, ata mitzava alav lafarnaso, v'ata mitzava alav la'ashro. So the Gemara is now going to discuss what the Torah means when it says that you have to support your local ani. So the Gemara says you're commanded to be mefarnes him, to support him, v'yata mitzava alav la'oshro, but you're not commanded to literally to make him rich. Asher yachsarlo, then it says you have to supplement him what he is indeed lacking. That's what the Torah says. Afilus sus lirkov alav ve'eved laritz lefanav. You have to give him, even if it's something that appears to be more than what he needs. For example, give him a horse for transportation, or a slave to run before him. And the Gemara ends off by saying, Amru alav al Hillel hazaken. They said about Hillel hazaken shalakach la'ani ben tovim, that he echad sus lirkov alav ve'eved laritz lefanav. That there was an ani ben tovim. Ani ben tovim the Gemara uses as a way of describing someone who's poor, but he comes from a good family, meaning a noble family, meaning he at one point had money. So someone who at one point had money and now took so the Gemara says that you have to give him, like we just said, a sus and an eved. And the story is told about Hillel that he actually got one. He helped out someone in terms of that. And it says va'avad laritz lefanav pamachas lo matza eved. So he tried to assist this poor person who fell in hard times, and he couldn't find an eved for him. So Hillel himself, the Gemara says, v'ratz lefanav shlosha milin, and he ran 3 mil in front of him to serve him. So Hillel couldn't find anyone to help out the situation. So he personally undertook to help this Ani ben Tovim out, and he became his Eved. Okay, so what's going on over here? It sounds like a weird Gemara. It doesn't really make sense. It makes sense to help people, right? There's an obligation of lending money and giving tzedakah, but let's see what this pasuk is all about. So the first thing you have to understand is that this pasuk is found in Parshas Re'eh. We happened to read a couple weeks ago. The laws of giving charity and or loaning money and helping people are found in about 5 or 6 places in the Torah, predominantly in Mishpatim, where it talks about loaning money to people. In Parshas Bahar, it talks about helping people out who are avadim, right? It says over there. So that's the parsha where it talks about lending money again, helping people out. Obviously, the prohibition of interest is mentioned over there. But the main sugya of tzedakah is found in Re'eh, where it talks about, where it gives the word ki patoach tiftach es yad chalo. which basically means you shall open up your hand for this poor person. And I'm reading now, it's Dvarim 15:8, if you're following at home. Open up your hand for him. So let's look at this pasuk. It's a very interesting pasuk, and we're basically going to spend the whole night trying to understand the problems that come from this pasuk. V'havet avitenu. So what are you doing? Let me rewind one pasuk before that. It says, if you have a needy person, right, who lives amongst you, then in the land that God gave you, it says, don't harden your heart and shut your hand against him. Okay, don't ignore him. Don't pretend the problem isn't there. That's what we'll call the lav, the lo taseh, the negative prohibition of ignoring the poor person. The aseh, the proactive solution is help him out, right? Open your hand. Then it says v'havet tavitenu. What does that mean? So it literally means you should lend him money. Okay, open your hand, lend him money. De machsoro, which is what the Gemara just quoted. Lend him what is chaser, right? It comes from the word chaser, what is lacking, right? Give him what is sufficient for him, asher yachser lo, that he is lacking. Basically, give him whatever is sufficient to meet his needs, what he doesn't have. Okay, that's what the pasuk literally means. Okay, now we're going to look at Rashi. Rashi says, now he quotes all of his commentary basically from this daf that we're learning, Ksuva Samach Zayin. So, for example, he says, Havet Tavitenu. Now, we didn't actually see this yet in the Gemara, but the Gemara halfway down is going to say, what's this pasuk talking about? On the one hand, we have charity, which is basically a matana, a gift, right? When you give charity to someone, you don't expect it back. You give a handout, someone's collecting money, you give tzedakah, right? You give tzedakah to your shul, to your school, to whatever organization, and it's a present. That's what most charities are all about. You don't expect the money back. This is the word habet havitenu. So Rashi says, Im lo ratza b'matana ten lo b'halva. Okay, there's two types, or there's two elements here that's going on. There's a matana, and then there is halva. Then there's a loan. That's why the Torah uses the word havata. As we're going to see, habata comes from the word a collateral, right? You don't have collateral when it comes to presents, right? There's collateral when it comes to a loan, okay, to make sure that the borrower pays back. So Rashi is already alluding to the fact that there's two different types of charity that the pasuk is referring to, either a matana or a loan. And the Gemara is actually going to say, in certain circumstances, what if the person doesn't want? He's too proud. He needs the money, but he's just too proud to beg. Right? It sounds like a song, ain't too proud to beg. Right? This person is too proud to beg, right? So he doesn't want to beg. So what does he do? So we trick him. We say, oh, we're really giving you a money. It's not for a present. We know that you don't want to take it, but it's a loan. And then after he has it for a few days, you wink, wink, and you say, you know what? Well, we forgive the loan and it becomes a present. Okay, so the Gemara deals with that situation. We're not going to really talk about it, but that is, if you're doing Daf Yomi, you would know that that actually was a topic on 67. So we have the two options. We have the present, classic tzedakah, then we have the loan. Okay, then Rashi says de machsaro. What does he say de machsaro means? Diata mitzvah la hashiro. So Rashi over here quotes our Gemara word for word and says, give him, right, what is sufficient for his particular needs, but quotes the Gemara and he says, but that's it. Don't make the guy rich, right? Obviously, or maybe it's not so obvious. So Rashi has to say it for a reason. Then the next part of the pasuk says, or the end of the pasuk says, Asher yachsar lo. Give him what he needs, what he is lacking. And Rashi says, "Afilu sus lirkov alav ve'eved laritz lefanav." It implies that if he's lacking was a, or he has to give him what he's used to. If he's used to a horse, give him a horse. If he doesn't have a slave anymore to do whatever it is that the slave used to do for him, you have to provide him with a slave. And then, of course, we have the story. Rashi doesn't bring it down, but of course, we have the story with Hillel where he became the person's slave. Okay, so that is basically Rashi. Okay. Now, whenever we learn Rashi, we know that not far behind Rashi, and we have to go step by step over here because this is a very, very it's a very perplexing mitzvah, and I want to just explain it as I do from the basic sources, from the foundation on up. So we have Rashi, who basically quoted our Gemara Maseches Ksubos, and then we have Nezer, who says something interesting. He says, "Open up your hand." It says, "Pasol tifach es yadcha lo." Who's the lo referring to? So obviously, you're opening up your hand for the poor person. So Ibn Ezra says 4 words, la'asher ein lo klum. You open up your hand to the person who has absolutely nothing. So it sounds like something was bothering the Ibn Ezra to say something that's right. He doesn't use any extra words, especially the Ibn Ezra, to those who actually study the Ibn Ezra and know how detailed he is on. So he's saying, give it to someone who absolutely has nothing. He's completely destitute. So you see already that he may not be, he's not quoting, give him a horse. He's saying help someone who really has absolutely nothing. Okay, so let's put that away for a minute. So getting back to Rashi, it sounds like Rashi is setting up the pasuk, or he's setting up the scenario that's not really evident at first. Meaning he's describing 2 types of people. He's saying that de machzero, right, is a person, right, who is lacking, meaning then the end of the pasuk says, asher yachzor lo, because Rashi is referring to the Gemara that we just saw in Ksubos, that it's referring to seemingly someone who had money, i.e. who had a high lifestyle. Second type of person here. This is someone who had it and lost it. That type of person says, or that type of person is also included. Okay, so apparently, just by some basic understanding of how Rashi breaks down the pasuk, it seems that we're treating 2 poor people differently, right? We're giving the basic necessities to this perennial poor person who never had a lifestyle, never had a high lifestyle, and doesn't know what it means to lose that horse. So we give him the basics to survive, and he should be happy with that. As opposed to the person who had everything, and then lost his horse and his slave, which obviously is symbolic for losing his wealth. So we have to build him up in order for him to relive what it's like to have that horse and that slave again. So the question is that fair? Meaning these are both poor people, and yet, as we saw in Rashi, and obviously he's quoting from the Gemara, we just literally read from the Gemara that we elevate this Ani ben Tovim, this Ani who came from a high family and good family and had money at one point, presumably, he raised him up. So the question is, and that's what we're going to deal with, is does it make sense? And what does the Gemara have to say about this? Because we're going to see examples later on 60 conflicting, at least in my opinion. Sometimes it says we help them. Sometimes it says we don't help them. So we're going to look at particular examples. But whether this is fair or not, just put that question on the topic of tzedakah, because this happens to be probably the most difficult mitzvah, okay, or concept, I would say. It's dealt with in Bava Basra in the first parak, and it's dealt with over here in Ksubas. And when the Gemara describes it, it describes different situations, which is not like most other topics where, yeah, there's always varying opinions. But when it comes to tzedakah, as we're going to see, because it's so sensitive and personalized, so there's many, many, many layers, so to speak, of how we deal with certain situations. So the way I wanted to begin with an introduction is to look at the Rambam. Okay, let's see how the Rambam describes this mitzvah. The Rambam says we are in, the Rambam has a whole subsection of Yad HaChazakah on Hilchos Matnas Aniyim. So here's the way he starts off the 10th parak of Hilchos Matnas Aniyim. He talks about Lekcha and Peya and Meiser and all the things that we help out, the Aniyim and the Levim. And then all the way at the end, he talks about tzedakah, and here how he starts off. He says, Chayavin anu lihizaher, the mitzvah tzedakah yoter mikol mitzvah saseh. When it comes to the mitzvah of tzedakah, okay, when it comes to, okay, you have to be, here are his words, Chayavin anu lihizaher. We have to be careful to observe it more than any other mitzvah that exists. So just by his introduction, now he doesn't say that about anything else. Like if you would think of a random mitzvah that you have to be very careful about, I would think of something like shchita, right? You have an animal, it's very, very difficult. You need years of training. You have to go to school and rabbinical school, and you have to practice. So in order to be a shochet, you have to really, really know your stuff, and you have to do it smoothly. And so many things could go wrong, right, when you're shechting an animal, right? So that's something that you have to be very careful with. You have to be careful when it comes to making matzah. You have to be careful when you're making tzitzis. There are a lot of things you have to be careful with. But the Rambam doesn't say anything of that. For some reason, the Rambam is saying when it comes to tzedakah, you have to be the most careful out of any other mitzvah. And then he goes on to of tzedakah, which we don't need to say. The Rambam just he says, Shehat tzedakah siman l'tzadik zera Avram Avinu. He says because tzedakah is a sign of that we are from the lineage of Avraham. Okay, and he brings a pasuk, ki yadati v'leman asher yitzal, and then he says, "Ein nekisa Yisrael miskonan v'dasa emes omedes elabit tzedakah." Basically, everything is tzedakah, and finally, the famous line that says, "Ve'ein Yisrael nigalan elabit tzedakah," right? And we will only be redeemed eventually because of tzedakah, as it says in the Haftorah a few weeks ago, "Tzion b'mishpat tipada v'shaveh b'tzedakah." So that's the Rambam's introduction to tzedakah. So it's very fascinating how he's already telling us why tzedakah is, you have to be very zahir, you have to be very, very cognizant and careful. And obviously, based on just the Gemara and Rashi that we saw, we could understand why this is different than making tzitzis and making matzah and doing shrita. When it's shrita, it's you and the cow, right? The worst case that happens is that you trafe up the cow and you can't eat the cow now, right? The cow doesn't really mind, right? Tzedakah, you're dealing with people and you're dealing with issues and there's sensitivity and there's all kinds of, things that could go wrong, right? And that's what the Rambam, I think, is saying. And you could already see, especially when you're dealing with, as Rashi said, two different kinds of poor people, how you treat them differently, right? It's very rare to have a mitzvah where so much preparation and mental capacity and judgment has to go into it in order, right, to get it right. Right? It's very, very, very particular. And, you could see it's not a human being, right? So we're already seeing that the Rambam is hinting that this is, this onion has very, very, very many layers. The chinuch, the chinuch, when he describes the mitzvah of lending money, he says the following. Says the Sefer HaChinuch. It is mitzvah 66. If you're keeping score at home. To lend money to a poor person according to what is in reach of one's hands, in accordance to what the poor person needs, in order to give him space and to lighten his distress. He uses the word anacha, right? That was last week's right, sighing, right? Remember that? Anyway, so he uses that word, right? According to his anacha, his distress. And he says, and he's quoting the Rambam over here. He says, "V'zos ha-mitzvah shel halva hi yoter chazaka u'mechayevet mitzvahs nesinas tzedakah." So now he's already alluding to, what the Gemara over here says, that, remember, there's the present, there's the donation, and then there's the loan. So he's quoting the Rambam in Tzedakah. Number 66 is the famous Imkes Ami found in Mishpatim, right? There is, of course, a mitzvah of Tzedakah in Parshas Re'eh, in Dvarim, right? That's not a loan per se. This is specifically Imkesef Talves Ami is talking about a loan. So he's saying over here, he's quoting the Rambam, and he's saying that when it comes to a loan, it is yoter chazaka u'mechayaves. It's stronger, okay? It's stronger and more obligatory than the mitzvah of just giving charity. Okay, I'll just read it in English just to save time. As the duress and the darkness of one whose duress is already known and revealed among people and has already asked from them is not the same as one who has not yet come to this embarrassment and still afraid to enter into it, right? If you could imagine the levels are, you fell, okay, you don't have money, and now you need loans. And if that doesn't come through, then you go out with your hand out. So obviously we don't want you to go with your hand, right? We want to give you the loan before you reach the lowest level, which is literally begging. That's why the Rambam, as quoted here by the Sefer HaChinuch, says that this is more important, this step is more important to tackle before you get to the step of actually begging. That's his proof, and of course that fits into the famous Rambam that we're not even going to talk about, which is a class by itself of the levels of tzedakah. Because as you know, lending money or / getting a job is the ultimate level. Don't just give him the money, right? Teaching how to, and not, right, when you're lending him the money to start something or to give him a job to start something new, that is the ultimate level. Okay, so that's why he says that this is stronger than that lending money is actually stronger than actually giving it away as a present, as a donation. And he says over here, and if he would have a little assistance, and he says over here, and then if God has mercy upon him with profit, he will pay his creditors and he will live on the remainder. So obviously the chinuch is very optimistic, and it says, well, you lend the money and he'll make a few investments, right? Give or take a month, a year, whatever it is, he's back on his feet, he pays you back, and he could start over fresh again, right? So therefore he says, don't let him come and ask for handouts first. First, give him the loan, and before the handouts. Okay, and then he he says the Shorish HaMitzvah. So he's explaining what the mitzvah is. Now he's explaining to you the root of the mitzvah. Now, obviously, we could understand the reason for lending money to people who need money, right? You don't need a chinuch to tell you, but he says it anyway. Sheratza ha'el lihiyos bruav milamdin umuraglim midas hachesed v'harachmim, so that we should be used to doing chesed. This should be something part and parcel to us, that we should be doing chesed all the time. And if we do it, kihi mida mishubeches, this is a great trait to have, right? To always help people. It's like good follows good, right? What are you doing? You're trying to better society, right? Helping people, and it makes you feel better. And as we're going to see that, forget the ani, right? Again, what's interesting here, he's flipping it over. He says, you're doing something, yeah, the guy's getting money, but you're doing something to help yourself. This is a win-win, right? The ani now has money to work with and to start something new, and you made yourself better by feeling better by doing something that God commanded you to do, right? And as we know, it says, Mahu Rachum, Mafatar Rachum, right? This is why we want to emulate the character traits of God. Just like he is merciful, so too we are merciful. What is the best example and manifestation that we could show that we are merciful? Lend someone money, right? So that is the words of the Sefer HaChinuch, okay? The next part of this introduction, which I think is very interesting, when I saw it, is the Rabbeinu Yonah. Okay, so the Rabbeinu Yonah has an interpretation on Pirkei Avos, and he has a line where he talks about the famous Mishnah in the third parak of chapter of Pirkei Avos. He says, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah Omer, Yimein Torah ein derech eretz. Okay, lots of people know this. Without this, I don't have that, right? Imim kemach ein Torah. So I want to focus on one line that he says. He says, Imein Torah ein derech. Now, what does derech eretz mean? Okay, that itself is very interesting because it means different things depending on the context. Okay, here we interpreted it as it literally means the way of the world. It means a worldly occupation. It means joining and contributing to the welfare of society. So he's telling you, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah says, if there's no Torah, then the concept of derech eretz doesn't exist. So here's what he says: Klomar, Misha enu yodea Torah, enu shalem b'midas derech shel derech eretz. He says, if you don't know Torah, okay, right, the one who does not know Torah is not complete in the traits of derech eretz. So far so good. That's pretty understandable. Then he explains deeper. Ki rov hamidos hatovos sheyesh bedarkei haolam b'torahem. He says, if you look at the character traits, the good traits that exist in the world, you will find most of them in the Torah. What's an example? So here's his first example. Kamo v'habet havitenu, lending money to someone, right? That's a great trait. And look at that, it's found in the Torah. Hanik tanik, right? Severance pay, okay? Either literally in the workforce today, right? It's a nice thing to do. You're letting a guy go. He may not find a job, right? Give him 6 months, right? Or in some case, a year and a half, right? Give him lots of money when he goes. Help him out. Be honest when it comes to scales and weights and measures. Don't rip people off when you're measuring salad for them. Moznei tzedek, avnei tzedek, v'kama v'kama kiyotze behem. He says there's so many examples of what we would call decent traits that are important for society to exist, and they're all found in the Torah. Im ken below Torah lo yihiyeh deos of shlemos b'derech eretz. So he says, if so, without the Torah, so his midos will not be complete. Okay, because you need Torah as a background in order to have these midos. Now, after reading this, so the first thing I thought of is, there's a very popular opinion out there, and I think we've all heard it from different kinds of people over the years. I would call it the Chiloni in Israel, like the secular Israeli, at least from my experience, or someone who's not religious, and when they feel like they get defensive, they say, "Oh, what do I need Torah for? Why do I need to do mitzvos? I'm a good guy. I pay this, right? I don't lists, 7 or 8 things, some of them from the 10 Commandments, right? I don't kidnap, right?" He's saying, why do I need all these? Why do I need the rest of the Torah? I'm perfectly happy. I'm a good citizen. I have no criminal record. Why do I need all this for? Right? It's funny. This reminds you of the Orach Chaim that we did a couple of weeks ago on Motzi Shemra, right? Where the Orach Chaim explains Motzi Shemra, right? Remember what he said? He said it's a parable for us saying, what do we need the Torah, right? Someone is Motzi Shemra on the Torah that we got from Har Sinai. He says, what do I need it for? Right? It doesn't make sense. I have no time to learn it. And he's Motzi Shemra on the Torah. So this is a little bit similar. So this is so when you hear this kind of conversation, I had a few of these actually with Israeli cab drivers during my year in Israel, right? They see me with a Gemara or something. They always are very inquisitive. I don't know what yeshiva I'm in, why I find it interesting to learn. So from my memory, there's been 2 or 3 occasions, and they all had the same, almost like prepared speech. That's why I called it the Chiloni argument of, why do I need to waste my time? I'm a good, right? I'm a good Jew. So it sounds like a very good argument. The problem is that this Rabbeinu Yonah kind of debunks it, because while on the one hand, you can have derech eretz without Torah, but we don't know enough how to act in certain circumstances if it weren't for the Torah. And what's his very first example? Right? Habet Tavitenu. Again, he says, Kirov hamidos hatovos sheyesh b'darkei ha'olam b'torahem. Most of the good traits you'll see are in the Torah. You don't have to go far. They're all in the Torah. And as we're going to see from our Gemara, there are circumstances that you have to give extra, circumstances where you have to give a certain way, right? And the person after him, and he flew into an oven, right? So is that logical? That's logical. So there are certain things that, while you may think they're in, right, and it makes sense to be just a regular guy who pays taxes and doesn't steal and is an upstanding citizen, but he's still missing a lot. And that's exactly why the Rabbeinu Yonah says with that we need the Torah. We can't figure out all the midos of derech eretz on our own. Okay, and based on that Rabbeinu Yonah, so I think he's cluing us in to this specific detail. What does Habet Havitenu mean? I just read it fast when I did it in Rashi. Habet Havitenu means loan him money, right? Loan him money. But why are you loaning him money? But you're doing it with a mashkon, because that's what ha'abata is, right? It's actually from last week's parsha, if you remember, where it talks about loaning money, and there's a mashkon, there's a collateral. You have to collect the collateral at night. You have to give it back to him, right? If it's a pillow, and if he's poor, you have to give him back the avot, which is a mashkon. So avot, al ayin beis vav tes, is referring specifically to a mashkon. Okay, a mashkon. Now, why are we using that example? Because the truth is, and I just want to show it to you in a chizkuni, right? I always say almost every week we have a chizkuni. He's very, very good. He explains a lot of it and very succinct. He says, "V'havet havitenu," not only lend him money, kachet avoto lahalvos lo alav, take his security, take his collateral as a guarantee that he will repay you the loan. Now, we're talking 35 minutes into the class, and we're extolling the virtues of loaning money and giving money and donating and doing this and doing that. Not for 1 second, right? It doesn't say it anywhere. In fact, the source that I found is the Netziv. The Netziv says, let me just find it. The Netziv says, "V'havet havitenu," right? Haperush kan shetinhog minhag derech eretz, v'titol mashkon b'shas halva. Okay, it's a warning, so to speak, to the lender to say, take a mashkon, take a collateral when you're loaning the money, shalo ya'avid ma'osav, so that you don't lose the money. What's the point of a mashkon? The point of a mashkon is that you should have something that's valuable enough for him to actually pay you back, right? Without the mashkon, he could just walk away from the loan and not pay you back. Obviously, the Gemara goes into it. Interesting how the Hemak Davar, how the Netziv on this word, right? Havot havitenu means make sure, right, to get this collateral, right, in case he can't pay you back. So, like I said, not really discussed, but is it a mitzvah at least to pay back, right? We haven't discussed this. So the Gemara actually is in Ksuvis. It's on Daf Pei Vav. We don't have time to go into it. Hopefully in a few weeks on Daf Pei Vav, I'll do a little bit on it because it's fascinating how, like I said, it doesn't really get fanfare, the paying back. Everyone's into loaning and this, but when it actually comes to paying back, the expression of the Gemara is Priyas Balchov Mitzvah. There's actually a machlokas amoraim whether paying your loan back is a mitzvah or not, right? So the Gemara uses the mitzvah. If you look in the 613 mitzvahs, I promise you, you will not find, either according to the Ramban, the Sefer HaMitzvos, the Sefer HaChinuch, anybody, 613 mitzvahs, it's not a mitzvah. So what does the word mitzvah mean? So it's actually a machlokas between Rashi and between the Ritva, and the Mordechai gets involved. Rashi quotes a pasuk of Hin Tzedek, right, where it says that you should be basically honest when it comes to measuring. And the Gemara says that your yeses should be correct and your no's should be correct. Hin Tzedek, V'lav Tzedek. That's according to Rashi at least. There's problems with that Rashi. We won't get into it now. The Mordechai says, why do you have to go through some obscure source? How about lo tigzol? Right? So one opinion says lo tigzol, I mean, you're not really stealing, but being honest. So that falls into the category of lo tigzol. Anyways, so we discuss a little bit over here, and as you go deeper and deeper, right, you see that it's in fact a very big discussion, this concept of actually paying back a loan and how Chazal view it. So I want to go back to where we started with this very difficult Gemara, where we said that there's two different people in this pasuk. Right? Remember, as Rashi said, and Gemara itself, there's this person because he never had money. So you give him the basic necessities, right? And we asked, is that fair? Why are we, quote unquote, favoring? It's not exactly favoring, but why does that person who's this Ani Ben Tovim, who once had, entitled to, as the Gemara says, get his horse back and get his slave back, right? Those are the two specific examples, right? So the question that we left off is, it's not really fair. So there's a very, very big qualifier that the Shitu Mekubetzes says. He says, not so fast. He says, V'hagaonim zal kasvu d'chol hani ma'asiyos da'ani ben tovim ba'ani she'enu meforsam ba'aniyos she'osin lo kavod. Meaning, we're talking about over here about this person who had, and now he doesn't have, is only when his case, i.e. his story, is not well known yet. So what we do is, if nobody knows what happened to him, then the Shitu Mikubetza says, Sha'osin lo kavod, then we try to him up by giving him on that higher level his horse, okay, his car, whatever it is you want to call it today, and his eved, okay, Kadei shelo yisparsem, because we don't want. However, he said, Aval anishen is parsem, but if everybody knows the situation, then ein lo ela ke'echad ma'ani Yisrael. Says the Shitu Mekubetzes in the name of the Gaonim, whoever those people are, it's already evident and it's known in the community, known wherever, then there's no chiyuv to give him his car, to give him his horse, to give him his eved. He's treated like a regular ani, Shebi Yisrael. So we see a very, very specific limitation on this rule. Okay, now the Gemara goes into many stories over here. I will read just a few of them quickly, because as I said before, we set the rules, right? If you are a run-of-the-mill ani, right, you get the minimum. If you're ani ben tovim, right, you had it and then you lost it, so you get much more. The problem is when you start looking at all the stories on this page 67, you'll see that kind of wishy-washy and not exactly accurate depending on the story. For example, okay, let's look at following story, which is right after where we left off. So we left off about 12 or so lines from the top. Okay, now the first line, the first medium-sized line says, Tamar Ban Maiseh Ba'anshe Galil El. It was a story, an incident involving people in the Galil. Shalakhu la'ani ben tovim echad mitzipor litre basar b'chol yom. Okay, so he was what we'll call this ani ben tovim, someone who, right, who had it and then he lost it. He lived in the city of Tzipori, and they would, okay, they would buy for him a certain amount of meat every day. Okay, so we say litra basar ma'irabus. Say, so why do you need to tell me that it was a liter of meat? Like, what's the chiddush in that? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Amar Rav Huna litra basar mishal ofos. Rav Huna says it was chicken, which happened to be very expensive. Okay, or the second answer is it was basar mamish. Rashi Amar hasim kfar katan haya b'chol yom hava mafsidi chayisem tulasa. That they bought it for him. Okay, they didn't spend so much on him, but because it was a small village, every day they needed one whole animal just for this person. Nobody ate what he ate. He was used to eating quality food. So when they gave it to him, they had to waste most of the animal because he was the only one who ate that animal, right? So they shechted the animal, they gave him his meat, but there was nothing they could do with the meat. They couldn't put it in the refrigerator because there was none at that time. So therefore, they went out of their way. Okay, so that's one story that sounds like, right, you're being observed for what they're used to. So let's look at the next story. They came in front of Rav Nechemia and they said, a certain person came and he said, what do you normally eat? He says, I go to Prime Grill every night. Okay, I get the best meat, I get the best wine. That's going to Rav Nechemia for charity. And he says, well, this is what I'm used to eating. So Rav Nechemia says, he says, I can't really satisfy you on your level, but how about a meal of lentils? Now we know that lentils is, animal food, basically. So that's all Rav Nechemia had. So he offered what he had. Okay, so Gilgal imo ba'adashim b'meis. The Gemara says they had an adashim meal together. They ate lentils, and the guy died meal. So Omar, so he said, Rab Nechemya said, Oy li lezeh shahargu Nechemya. He said, woe unto me, right, who was killed by Nechemya. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? What does that mean? He wasn't killed by Nechemya. Adarabba, oy lo Nechemya shahargu lezeh. The Gemara says, no. Nechemya should bemoan the fact that he killed this person. He gave him something that he wasn't used to, and now he suffered the consequences of eating something that he's not used to, and now the guy dropped dead. So the Gemara says, no. So the end of the Gemara says that really Rab Nechemya meant that it was the ani, right, who killed himself to that kind of life. In this story, at least, eat a dashim once, it shouldn't come for you, right, to die. So he was basically, right, so the ani was basically the only one to blame for his own death. Okay? And because he wasn't used to it, he only had fancy food and fancy wine, he couldn't digest something as simple as lentil. So it sounds from this that the Gemara is looking down on that kind of a person. I mean, Rab Nechemya did nothing wrong. He offered him what he had. He didn't think that the person would die, but in the end he died because he wasn't used to that kind of food. So this Gemara, in my opinion at least, conflicts with this, of giving the person that, right, look what happened, right? Meaning you shouldn't be on a level where you can't accept something less, right? It's almost like musr to someone, right? Don't live such a lifestyle like this, where if you ever had to change, you would end up dying. Obviously, this is an extreme case, but I think there's what to talk about, and get some kind of proof from this Gemara as to how we view this situation. And now there's a following Gemara. If you're continuing on, it's kind of in the middle of the page. And he said, what are you, right? He said, what do you normally eat? So so here we have another fine shmecker. Okay, this is what I'm used to. The best wine, right? The fattiest meat, right? Lamb chops. I only eat the best. So Amar Le v'lo chayshid leducha de tzibura. Wow. So Rava. Now, what could Rava have said? Rava said, "Oh, what you're used to." Rava didn't say that. Okay. Now it ends. The story has a good ending, unlike the previous story. But Rava is not too happy with the person's answer. He says, aren't you concerned about causing too much of a burden for the community to... Rava doesn't seem that to buy this concept of upping the ante for this person. So the person was smart. So this poor person said, think that it is from their funds? You think that I eat from their funds? I eat from the fund of God. The Tanya, and he brought a brisa. Pasuk we say a few times a day. That should sound familiar, right? Bi'itam lo nemar ela bi'ito, right? Which basically says at their time, right? It does their time. It says in its time. What do you mean in its time? It means that each person is individual, right? That God, right, appropriates food for each person, okay, according to in their proper time. Meaning the community, the communal fund is basically the agent is serving as the agent of God in distributing it to this person, right? But that's his, that's his chelek, that's his share. Okay, so he seemed to justify, right, his standard. So what happens at the end? Right then and there in that story, Rava's sister, who we hadn't seen in 13 years, we're not sure why, came in, right, the long lost sister, comes into the base medrash, and look what she was carrying. She says, Vasila Tarnagolos Betum Yain Yashan. She came in and she was holding exactly what she wanted to eat. A big wine. Wow. Understood. The shliach, here is your food. On the one hand, in the beginning of the story, Rava wasn't too excited that the person was asking for something that, he didn't necessarily deserve, because it was more than what, most poor people would eat. But in the end, he was saved, right? So, we have, because I wanted to finish up with a couple of other things. At the end, we have another story of Rab Chanina, right? Rab Chanina, we're on the last line. Rab Chanina, on the last line of 67. Rab Chanina knew a certain person who, right, and his minhag was 4 dinars every Erev Shabbos. Once he was too busy, and he gave his money, and he gave the money, the tzedakah money, to his wife to be the shliach. Okay, so what happened was, Asai Amrle Lo Tzarech. She came home with the money. He said, "What's going on? I don't think he needs it." So Gemara says, "My chazit." What did the wife see that she thought he didn't need the money? So Shmaya Dahave Ka'amrle, because I heard them saying to him inside of his house, they for Shabbos, what are we doing tonight? Are we doing gold tablecloths or are we doing silver tablecloths? Well, now that doesn't sound like a poor man's house. So when she overheard this, she said, "Oh wow, this guy apparently, right, is this guy is ripping off the government." So she wasn't too happy about that, so she went home. So Rab Chanina took the high road, and he said, yes, there are always going to be those kind of people. And he said, Amar Hainu da Amar Rabbi Elazar ba'u v'nachzik tova l'ramayim. Says Rabbi Elazar, thank God for fraudsters. Okay, thank God for people who rip people off. Shel malehen hainu chotin b'chol yom. Because if it weren't for them, we would sin every day. Right, which is a pasuk in A also, which says that if you don't give it to someone who needs it, then they're going to cry out and it'll be a sin. So because these fraudsters take our money, have an excuse, right, for failing to meet our obligation, which is a, backhanded, compliment saying, thank God there are these people that, give us an excuse, right, for really giving out all the tzedakah that we need to do. So again, this is a different type of a problem where you have people, forget about whether they had money and lost, who don't even need money and who are collecting anyways. So the Gemara doesn't really talk about that too much, but, you can see how this, and how we deal with that circumstances. So we see many different circumstances, and now we're a little understanding of, the Rambam and why he says what he says when it comes to this being the most difficult to do. I wanted to end off things I saw. One from, let me just open it up. The Be'er Mayim Chaim we quoted him once or twice before, of Chaim of Chernovich. Shmuel's related to him. 1775 to 1815. Okay, considered a major classic Hasidic work. He discusses the pasuk in it says, "Va'atem es Hashem Elokechem uverach es lachmecha." Okay. If after we have a lot of the mitzvahs that are given, it says, and you should serve God, and as a result, we'll get a bracha. And he's bothered. Other Rishonim, other commentators, I saw the Kliyakar, are also. Then it says, "Uverach es lachmecha," and then God, will give a bracha to you in your bread, and in your water. So it starts off with Lashon Rabim, and it ends off by Lashon Yachid. So here's what he says. Ve'ulam kizeh shahada muvdal mechavero b'nahaginasam b'nehigioseim hu al shnei panim. He says, he gives a very, very profound psychological insight into people. He says, people are different, as we all know. There's two different ways you could be different from someone. I'm different than my neighbor, and we do things differently. There's only two possibilities. It's either mentally or physically, meaning I'm more, what he uses the word mefunak, right? I'm more finicky, right? I'm more sensitive. I demand more, right? There are people who we know who demand more than us, and there are people who we know who demand less than us, right? There's all kinds of people in the world. So a mefunuk is one who, right, who needs his wine, who needs his slave, right, who needs his car, right, who needs the finer things. So that's called a mefunak, as they say in Hebrew today. So that's one person, and someone who's used to something all his life, and Nebuch for one meal has to have lentils, and he drops dead. Okay, that is certainly a mefunak, right? So that is someone who's different from someone mentally, not physically. He has trained himself to be different, and that's what he's used to. His standard of living is just higher than other people's. Then there's a second type. The second type of person is, Shabbat mitzad hacholi, a physical. I'm different than you physically because my body is different, right? I'm not as healthy as you. I have to eat different food than you because I digest differently. I can't walk, I'm handicapped. No. You know why I have a slave? You know why I have a horse? Not because you think it's because of standard of living. It's because I can't get around. I can't walk. I can't do anything. I need an assistant. I need an aid, right? Nebuch, right? So that's why he's different. Not because his standard of living is higher, but it's because he just needs help to get around. So these are two kinds of people, okay, that look the same, meaning that you don't know which is it. Is it A or is it B? So says over here, he says, so that's why God giving my bracha out, I'm going to do it personal. I'm going to personalize my bracha. It says, Lorat Salomer b'Lashon Rabim. It says it in Lashon Yachid, not in Lashon Rabim, ki Lashon Rabim hu hakol al hakol, because that will include everyone. No. I'm not blessing everyone's bread the same. I'm going to bless your personal bread. And we know how many different kinds of breads there were. I was in Trader Joe's yesterday, and I counted something like 25 different kinds of breads and rolls and sourdoughs and multigrain and gluten-free and organic. There's literally 25 different varieties of bread you could get, right? This is exactly what he's saying. He's saying everyone has a different appetite. Everyone tolerates something differently than the next person. That's why it says, lachmecha, that's personalized to you. Kasher miyuchad, it's personalized specifically l'chol echad ve'echad miYisrael lefi tivo, according to your nature. That's why the bracha goes to you. He says, all of your needs are going to be blessed. Afilu sus lirkov alav, even if you need a horse. Now he's expanding from the bread to the horse. Even if it's the horse that you're missing, but you need it, then I'm going to personalize my bracha for your horse to come back. Ki hakol mechuna al shem halechem, right? Because everything is the proverbial bread. Into this nice vart, exactly like we've been saying all along, that it is, personalized what you get, but that's only if that's only if you're worthy for your reward. And I just wanted to end off with another vart like that from the other fan favorite, the Pele Yoetz. Pele Yoetz says something very insightful also. He says over here, he has a very beautiful paragraph on where he distinguishes between what we call needs versus wants, right? You always hear this speech from someone in your life, your parent, your teacher, your Rebbe, right? We have needs and we have wants, and the biggest problem is when the two collide and they overlap. And your needs become your wants become your needs. So he has a very beautiful paragraph on that. And I'm just going to read a little bit. He says, he says the reality of it today, now this is 500 years ago, he says what we have become accustomed to, right, i.e. our wants, have become mukhrach, or our needs. Meaning we're used to something for so long and we forget that it's great. He says the problem is the gravy, though, is becoming the main dish. Okay? But, he says, God only gives you what you actually need according to your deeds. If you're zoche, nosen es achlam v'ito shakol echad lefi ma shehergul HaKadosh Baruch Hu mizamin lo be'eza ofen sheyeh, right? O sheyarviach demach saro o min tzedakah. Whatever it is that you are particularly lacking, right? Because it was once a want, now it's become your need. God will supplement you, right? Either one way or another, or from the tzedakah. And he brings our Gemara, and he brings a proof from this person who was used to a certain food that we discussed, and then magically it came. Well, im ein lo zechut, but if he doesn't have a zechus, meaning he has no reason, there's in his favor going for him, right? Im ein lo zechus tola kedei sheyitnu lo lemosros. Right, his wants, he has no reason to fulfill. He hasn't done anything to deserve his wants. Then then he's going to have to earn it himself. And then you say, oh, ros rabos vitzaros, and then unfortunately, if he can't do it, then he'll be right up the river, right, as they say. So it's a very interesting Peleo. It's how he takes this too well about needs and wants colliding and intersecting, and he applies it to our Gemara, and I think that's a very beautiful way of understanding it also. So we went a little overtime, as we always do, but there's much more